Good morning and welcome to the Killik & Co market update. Clearly it's been a very difficult week for markets, and we have seen global indices approaching correction territory this week, meaning these indices have fallen 10% or more from their recent highs. Now clearly if you are invested, it is quite concerning to see falls of this level, but one thing to bear in mind is that falls of this magnitude are actually not that uncommon. If we go back to 2008 and look at how the market has moved since then, there have actually been 16 falls of 5% or more since 2008. And there have been 5 falls approaching the 10% level, or even going further than that, and that's just since 2008. So falls of this magnitude are not particularly uncommon, and historically the market has bounced back relatively quickly when it has fallen to that extent. So just something there to bear in mind. Now here's a chart showing the FTSE 100 over the last year, and you can see that over the last couple of weeks there really has been quite a significant fall, and the index has now hit its low for the entire year. Let's look at the constituents of the index that could have contributed the most to this, and the largest one has got to be Royal Dutch Shell. Now Royal Dutch Shell is a very large oil company, and it accounts for quite a large proportion of the FTSE 100 index, so movements in the share price of Shell can actually have quite a large bearing on what the overall index is doing. So here's a share price chart showing Shell over the last year, and you can see the share price is down more than 20% over just this year so far. The reason being that the oil price is down, and probably the biggest contributor to that is the fact that less oil demand is coming from China. So we've had quite a large drop in the share price of Shell, and apparently that has caused 15% of the current 10% drop in the FTSE 100 index. So the 10% drop in the FTSE 100 index can be 15% attributed to the fall in the price of Royal Dutch Shell alone. Let's have a look at some other big movers within the FTSE 100. Here are some share price falls that have happened over the last week. We've got to think to ourselves about whether or not some of these actually make sense. So the first one is EasyJet, down over 26% in the last week alone. We know that a number of flights have been cancelled, people aren't flying so much, people are cancelling holidays left, right and centre, particularly since last weekend when the virus actually spread into Italy. So perhaps it makes sense that we have seen quite a hit to the share price of EasyJet. Next one, Rio Tinto, down over 12%. We do know that Rio Tinto sells a lot of iron ore into China, so perhaps it does make sense that that share price has come down quite significantly. On the other hand, we've got Lloyds Bank, down over 10%. Lloyds really only operates in the UK, so we are questioning whether it's right that some shares such as Lloyds have fallen to such a significant level. So while there are many shares in the market that perhaps should have fallen, there are some shares that perhaps have fallen by levels that don't quite make sense, and it does seem there is an element of panic selling in some areas of the market. And I think perhaps looking on the bright side, there are going to be some areas of the market that could potentially see greater opportunity because of the spread of this coronavirus. So, for example, some areas of the healthcare market, and perhaps e-commerce and some parts of digital payments, because people are perhaps staying indoors rather than going out spending money. So not all bad news, but of course the situation is still evolving very quickly, and we are keeping a very close eye on markets at the moment. And also this week, Hammerson, the UK property company, has announced it will be cutting its dividend by almost half. And I don't think this will come as much a surprise to investors, given the difficulties we've seen in the UK retail property markets over the last few years. Here's the share price chart for Hammerson. As you can see, it's down from over £7 a share 5 years ago to just over £2 per share today. And in fact, this week, Hammerson has announced that it's just sold 7 retail sites for 22% less than those sites were valued at just last year. So I think this is a reminder that we need to be looking at the contents of any property funds that we own. And also on the subject of property, the M&G UK property portfolio, which is the largest property fund within the UK, still remains closed to investors who want to withdraw their money. Now last year there was a fairly high level of withdrawals from this fund. The fund managers prevented investors from taking their money out, and as of this week that fund still remains closed. So I think it's a reminder that we need to be careful what funds we select when we are investing in UK property. And finally this week, we've been keeping an eye on the level of withdrawals coming out of UK income funds managed by Invesco. Now, at Invesco, there is a fund manager called Mark Barnett, who is widely known to be the protege of Neil Woodford. Now, because of all the issues with the Woodford funds, many investors have also been withdrawing money from funds that are managed by Mark Barnett. And it was reported that in the final quarter of 2019, over £1 billion was withdrawn from Mark Barnett's funds. And it's just been reported this week that in January, a further £200 million was withdrawn from Mark Barnett's funds. Now, no matter how good you are at managing funds, it's very difficult to maintain a good performance when you are continuously having to sell investments because investors want their money back. So high levels of withdrawals are always a concern. And if you do have funds that are managed by Mark Barnett, we would encourage you to have a look at those and ascertain whether the high levels of withdrawals are impacting performance. Now, moving on to the week ahead, clearly we'll be watching very closely to see what happens with the coronavirus. In terms of corporate reporting, the diary is looking fairly quiet, but we have got results out from Kion and Ashtead. That's it from us. Have a great weekend, and we'll see you next Friday.